I would like to invite Benjamin Pasternak, the president and CEO of Defiant Food Group and AuraPea, to the stage. Welcome him.
Thanks everybody for taking the time in Vegas to come out and spend a little time to have a little chat. If you guys don't mind, there's so few of you here. If you could just stand up and move up to the front of the hall so I can spend some time and get a little bit more intimate with you, that would be fantastic. And nobody's going to attack you or touch you, make you feel uncomfortable or otherwise. Look, I was asked to come to Vegas to chat with you guys about a paradigm shift in the food industry. And I thought deeply about, do I talk about AI? Do I talk about new technologies, which I'll touch on a few? Do I talk about meaningful change in the food industry? And why? And that's really where I found myself, was that thinking about the idea that we're going through this evolution, revolution, transition in the way we think about food because we're more conscious of it. Some of that's exactly what the speaker before was talking about with social media. Some of that was the fact that we've become more knowledgeable just with the fact that we can get information, it's more readily available to us all. But at the end of the day, what's really transitioning is that we care more about our health because we're more conscious of it. We care more about the people that we interact with, and we're all trying to find meaning after a year of COVID-19. And so we're really searching for our purpose, right? And so this is more about, when we think about food and we think about the elements of both plant-based and animal-based foods, we really are trying to find meaning in what we put into our bodies and how we internalize that. And so when I think about that, I think about where did my purpose come from in life? And I can tell you, you saw a picture of my grandmother and my father that was up on the screen just earlier. And I can tell you that my grandmother is definitely by far the most meaningful person in my life. And she taught me meaning, she taught me love, she taught me how to have purpose in life and how to create change, okay? And she did that by just caring and nourishing and loving the people that were around her. And I'm gonna tell you guys a little story, and I might get a little choked up, but that's okay. My grandmother met my grandfather after a death march. The Nazis, my grandfather was both in Dachau and Auschwitz, and they death marched my grandfather into a little city in Lublin, Poland. And my grandmother happened to be in that city after she was released from a work labor camp, and they were all malnourished. And they were all meant to die and to starve to death. And the reason they wanted them to starve to death was because prior to World War II, the Jewish population, and many people were discriminated against, so I just don't want to make it about Jews, but the Jewish population in Germany was so successful in their ability to become doctors and become lawyers in the system that was existing. It was the freest place in the world for Jews. And because of that, they became the people that became most discriminated against. And we can see a lot of that in our society today here in the United States on how polarized we are. Even when it comes to food, we think about, is it plant-based, is it animal-based? We have food discrimination now. I mean, think about that. That's quite a thing. And what I'm concerned about is that we shouldn't discriminate about food. We should discriminate about things that don't nourish about food, right? We need to be nourished to be successful in life. That's a cute picture. And so what I think about often when I think about my grandmother is women in society that could have made tremendous change. And sometimes I think we didn't really listen to them. They nourished us, they fed us, they took care of us, They created the nuclear family for us. They challenged each and every one of us. How many of you out there would say that the person most influential in your life was your mother? How many? Mine was my grandmother, but my mother all the same. She took care of me on a daily basis. So I think the women in our lives are incredibly important. And when I look back at food and the development of food, I often find myself perplexed about how women seem to, no matter what culture you're in around the world, the women are the ones that are actually feeding us in our families, right? They're the ones that take care of us on a daily basis. They're the ones that determine what we put into our mouths as a young child. They nourished us from the time we came out of the womb. But very often when it comes to the meat industry and the food industry all alike, we find ourselves getting direction mostly from men. I've sat around the table with a lot of men that sit and take the position that if we just put a little more filler into this product, we would make a little bit more money. We would be a little bit more profitable, okay? And they do it with joy in their hearts when they cheat us out of what we put into our bodies. And I want to change that system, okay? And I think that part of that change is bringing women into the fold to be able to continue to drive us into the future, right? And so we're at a crossroads. People are waking up on a daily basis. 2/3 of people are now actually reading the ingredient statements after COVID-19. I have CEOs throughout the industry that call all the time and say, hey, I can't get labor for my restaurants anymore because nobody wants to touch raw chicken. We're in a crossroads. We're in a point in time in history where we can make a decision about how we nourish ourselves and what food we put into our body that could not only change our bodies and how we feel about ourselves and make us spiritually more aware, but we also are at a point in time where if we make these changes, we'll create profits in the industry like no other. It can completely revolutionize exactly who and what we are, not only as a nation, but as a world. And the globalization of food and our ability to approach it from a kind of a sustainable approach from when we raise a chicken, when we raise an animal, to when we raise the crops that we grow. If we take the right approach to sustainably doing that, we can actually sustain life, and we actually will reduce the chance of having war because we will not be impoverished. And so I'll step back for a second and kind of read into my speech a little bit, but I just wanted to open up with that. I think that at this crossroads, it's important that we become a little bit defiant. What do I mean by defiant? We have to ask a lot of questions of ourselves. We can't accept doing things the way it's always been done. We have to think about, is it proper to grow a chicken in a chicken house without an obstacle course, right? Shouldn't chickens have obstacle courses in their houses so they can enjoy themselves? Why shouldn't they? We know those chickens come to the house and when they get to the slaughterhouse, they actually get processed and their bodies are actually healthier when they have an obstacle course. Purdue Farms is putting obstacle courses in all of their houses. Why shouldn't Tyson? Why shouldn't Sanderson Farms? Why shouldn't Foster Farms? I want an obstacle course in my house, so I'm going to go get one. I think that our perspectives on food need to start with sustainability to the environment. And we talk about that often, that we believe that the environment's incredibly important, but then we make choices that often aren't conscious of that. I think that our future is going to be determined by becoming more conscious of what our decisions are when we pay the bill at a restaurant or we pay the bill in a grocery store. And you can see that we're flourishing in the sustainable area, but I think it's going to become more so as time goes on. I want to talk a little bit about women a little bit further, and I wanted to say over the past 100 years, there's been a number of women who have made significant discoveries and have impacted and nourished the world. They've approached science with a bit of defiance, questioning the status quo to make discoveries that have profoundly changed the way we eat. These women, watch the video, I guess, if it comes on.
Ellen Swallow Richards, born 1842, was an American chemist and founder of the home economics movement, which applied scientific principles to the household. She was the first woman admitted to MIT, talk about Defiant, and a researcher there for almost 40 years. She encouraged women to enter the sciences and published several books. Her first book, The Chemistry of Cooking and Cleaning, addressed the science behind cooking and cleaning and was published at least 3 different times. In addition to being a pioneer in science, she devoted her life to nourishing people. She set up the New England Kitchen to offer working-class families in Boston nutritious foods and demonstrate how to prepare them at low cost.
The quality of life depends upon the ability of society to teach its members how to live in harmony with their environment, defined first as family, then the community, then the world and its resources. You cannot make women contented with cooking and cleaning, and you need not try. If you keep your feathers well oiled, the water of criticism will run off as from a duck's back. One of the greatest faults of the women of the present time is a silly fear of things, and one object of the education of girls should be to give them knowledge of what things are really dangerous. The well-educated young woman of 1950 will blend art and sciences in a way we do not dream of. The science will study the art, and the art will give charm to the science. This young woman will marry, yes indeed, but she will take her pick of men who will by that time have begun to realize what sort of men it behooves them to be.
Elsie Widdowson, born in London in 1906, is now seen as a pioneer in the field of nutrition, in part for revealing the importance of early nutrition in later life. In the 1940s, she and her research partner, Robert McCants, advocated the fortification of food with vitamins and minerals, leading to the addition of calcium carbonate to bread.
If your results don't make physiological sense, think and think again. You may have made a mistake, in which case, own up to it. Or you may have made a discovery. Above all, treasure your exceptions. You will learn more from them than all the rest of your data.
Agnes Faye Morgan was born in 1884 and became the longtime chair of the Home Economics program at the University of California. She had pursued her PhD in organic chemistry after being passed over for promotions by younger men. Only 11% of PhDs at that time were earned by women. She was committed to bringing science to nutrition and home economics. She developed a rigorous science curriculum for her students that included chemistry, biochemistry, physiology, bacteriology, and statistics. The UC Berkeley administration criticized the department for having overly rigorous requirements. Though she was given little money for research, her lab made significant discoveries regarding the nutritional composition of foods and the biochemistry of vitamins. She studied the effects of the vitamin B5 on adrenal gland function and connected dietary fat and increases in serum cholesterol.
So I came to the University of California then, in January 1915, and began giving courses in dietetics and nutrition, a subject I knew nothing about and nobody else knew much about at that time. I had to dig up the subject matter mostly out of German medical journals. The old-fashioned cooking and arithmetic combination that had been considered to be dietetics I would have nothing to do with. In the first place, I wasn't a very good cook, and I wasn't interested in cooking. I had been brought here to do something practical for the preparation of dietitians, but I wasn't able to suggest anything practical. What I wanted was to establish a scientific foundation for the various practices that were taught as nutrition at that time.
Mary Engel Pennington, born in 1872, was denied a bachelor's degree in 1892 because she was a woman. She still managed to earn a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania and became a bacteriological chemist. She played a pivotal role in improving sanitation for milk and milk products. She oversaw the design of refrigerated warehouses and commercial and residential refrigerators, and was head of an investigation of the refrigerated boxcar design. She also developed standards for the safe processing of chickens raised for human consumption. Gertrude Elion, born in 1918, graduated summa cum laude in chemistry at the age of 19. She's played an instrumental role in the development of a drug that has cured 80% of children with leukemia and the first drug for treating patients with HIV.
Don't be afraid of hard work. Nothing worthwhile comes easily. Don't let others discourage you or tell you that you can't do it. In my day, I was told women didn't go into chemistry. I saw no reason why we couldn't. Nobody took me seriously. They wondered why in the world I wanted to be a chemist when no women were doing that. The world was not waiting for me. It is important to go into work you would like to do. Then it doesn't seem like work. You sometimes feel it's almost too good to be true, that someone will pay you for enjoying yourself. I've been very fortunate that my work led to useful drugs for a variety of serious illnesses. The thrill of seeing people get well who might otherwise have died of diseases like leukemia, kidney failure, and herpes virus encephalitis cannot be described in words.
And now, Natalie Shears of Chalmers University is an example of a woman currently making inroads in the field of molecular nutrition. She's working with her research team to investigate the extracellular effects of absorbed nutrients. That may involve the regulation of transport proteins and enzymes of stress responses that may lead to cancer, cell death, or oxidative damage. And Vandana Shiva is a physicist, ecologist, activist, and author who defends the environment tirelessly. She fights for changes in the paradigm of agriculture and food, and she has assisted grassroots organizations of the green movement.
The primary threat to nature and people today comes from centralizing and monopolizing power and control. Not until diversity is made the logic of production will there be a chance for sustainability, justice, and peace. Cultivating and conserving diversity is no luxury in our times. It is a survival imperative. It's not an investment if it's destroying the planet. The time has come to reclaim the stolen harvest and celebrate the growing and giving of good food as the highest gift and the most revolutionary act. Nature shrinks as capital grows. The growth of the market cannot solve the very crisis it creates. We are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all.
So, many women pioneered the field of nutrition and home economics, but business interest manipulated or harnessed their original influence for profit. Mark Bittman argues in his book, Animal, Vegetable, and Junk, big business made home economics its marketing machine. Matter of fact, Herbert Hoover made it his speech to define war. He took home economics and defined it in a way that was all about global profitability in the United States. You should read up on it. Despite all the knowledge we gained from scientific work of the people like Elsie Widdowson, the food industry became the junk food industry. According to Bittman, foods have become highly processed, we know this, leading to overconsumption. And at the end of the day, in the last century, 50% of us consume most of our food outside of the home. How many of you actually took home economics? It doesn't exist for those that are young, does it? I think we need it. I think as we become a more diverse families, we have more divorce and more separation. We need to go back to our roots and find home economics important again. We can even see today the ways in which food companies take good concepts, animal-based and plant-based, and they bastardize them in an attempt to make further profits. So, supercharging our bodies. We need to get back to a place where we restore the nutrition in the food that we eat. We need to think about food in both something that we enjoy and it's delicious, but also something that's important to establish our bodies. Feeding our immune systems can help us fight off COVID-19, diseases, cancer, heart disease, diabetes. so we need to have highly nutritional foods. I want to talk a little bit about animal-based and a little bit about plant-based foods, because first we need to start on the front end of how we grow these foods and why. And so when we think about cattle, I'm going to tell you guys a story about going on to a 1 million acre farm, but in the United States, most of our cattle is grown and produced in feedlots. So these animals, 14 to 16 months, 60% of our corn in the United States actually goes to feeding these guys, and they really are kind of malnourished animals at the point in time that they're densely put into a feedlot. And has anybody been to a feedlot? Yes. Pretty disgusting place, right? And it's unhealthy. And so if we're growing animals in an unhealthy way and then consuming them because it reduces the cost so that everybody can have the abundance of beef, maybe we should think about doing that in a regenerative method, right? And so we have companies like Sunfed, we have companies like Tees out of Australia. This is actually on a farm that I was at in Australia, where we're not only grass feeding animals the way that they were naturally supposed to be raised, but those animals are going 36 months or greater amounts of time. And so they are weaned off of their mother later. They're given proper nutrition throughout the 36 months, if not longer. And they actually come through the process. And I don't know how many of you have been to a slaughter plant, but when you look at an animal from the inside instead of the outside, you can tell the amount of stress that was put onto that animal during its life, okay? And so I got a chance to go to a 1 million acre farm in Australia, little city of Roma. It's about a 4-hour flight from Brisbane inward into the kind of the grasslands of the country. And on this 1 million acre farm, they had 28,000 head of cattle that started at one point and literally rotated in a circle in its life on 1 million acres. To give you an idea what 1 million acres is, it's 1/6 the size of Vermont, right? It's a pretty big plot of land. You actually, on that facility, you actually harvest the cattle using horses, and they actually end up with about 70% of their cattle being premium graded cattle. So they actually get a return on their investment because they actually did the proper things during the life of that animal. Okay, so they actually get a premium for that product. It's interesting. I asked the question while I was there, how much of that product gets to the United States? And we consume a considerable amount of Australian beef. Matter of fact, McDonald's is the largest consumer of ground beef coming out of Australia. But what's interesting is the premium cattle that are coming out of Australia are being bought and sold into Asia because the Asians are willing to pay for the premium product, and we just keep sucking up the stuff that McDonald's needs. So it's just something to think about. And when we think about nourishing the animal in its life, we end up getting the benefit of that nourishment, right? Because that animal actually has a higher nutritional impact because it ate the right things, it lived the right life. And so there are actually there's a Carver family out of Washington State that reluctantly or kind of happenstance, the sons took over their farm and they started processing cattle that were 5 to 6 years old. And as they went through that process, they realized that the 5 to 6 year old cattle, actually most of them were prime. Because as the animal got older, right, and the USDA grades by fat content, your body slows down, just like us, right? And as your body slows down, you get a higher fat content. You get prime beef. So speed is not always your friend, right? Speed doesn't always create more profit. It might create more abundance in the short term, but that abundance nutritionally doesn't have the same impact. So I want to talk a little bit about plant-based products, and I just founded a plant-based company, and what I think moved me, I had the question yesterday, somebody said, hey, why did you get into plant-based? You're an animal guy. And I said, well, I got into plant-based because if we don't make the switch to more plant-based protein consumption, we have a fundamental problem from an economic issue, but really a sustainability of the earth is going to depend upon our carbon footprint being smaller and reduced. And the way to do that is to start to supplement our diets with plant-based products. Now, I know I talked a little bit about food discrimination, and I'll say that food discrimination is a real thing. There are people, there's probably somebody in this room that thinks eating an animal is a bad thing, and I hear you. I'm listening to you. But I also can tell you that I sat on a panel of folks that were going through eating disorders, and I had one of the young ladies say to me, Ben, how do you feel about being a vegan? And I said, if it's what your body's asking you for, then go for it. And she said, well, I want to be a vegan, and I feel like I should be a vegan, but if I go about 72 hours without animal protein, I feel sick. And so I just, when we think about discrimination and saying somebody should be all plant-based or all animal-based, I want us to think about what that means. And why did she feel sick? Because there's amino acids, and I can get into the details of this if you guys have questions, but there's amino acids that are in animal-based that aren't readily available in plant-based to the same level, okay? It doesn't mean you can't get it from plant-based, it just means you have to consume a heck of a lot more of the plant-based products, and you have to consume the right plant-based products to actually get those amino acids. Without those amino acids, your brain's not going to function at the same level. So if you've ever eaten plant-based, you should try it for 72 hours or so. You're going to probably, the first couple times you do it, you're going to feel a little weird in your head, kind of like the first night you're in Vegas, right? That first little buzz you have in your head the first night you're in Vegas. Well, that little feeling is the fact that your body is not breaking down things the way that it should. And so when I think about a vegan-based diet or a plant-based diet, I really think about a flexitarian world is really where we're going to see the greatest growth moving into the next 10 to 15 years. It's not going to be vegan or animal-based. It's going to be a flexitarian world that's really going to have the largest impact and growth for us as a society. I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about, does anybody have any questions about plant-based and animal-based before I go into anything else? Anyone? Because I can talk about it. Go ahead.
What are the plant-based that have the most amino acids?
Actually, so soy does, but obviously soy is an allergen. So it actually scales at a 1. Chickpea comes in kind of second. Depending upon where the chickpea comes, it's a 0.75 to 0.8. So chickpea's a good supplement to that. There's actually and we're going to start to see this, I believe. There's actually a scale, a digestibility scale that we use to understand the amino acids and what happens in your body. And I think that we're probably within about 5 years from that scale being identified in our ingredient statements. So I think I was asked the question yesterday on the panel about, regulation. And I think at the end of the day, regulation's going to come, but it's going to come in the form of giving us point of sale knowledge to that type of question, right? Because we need the answers to that. What happened with ingredient statements and the way they were developed by the USDA and the FDA back in the day really were post-World War II concepts about basic information that they wanted to provide to us, but many times those calories and the information that's there, if your body can't digest that product, then regardless of what the ingredient statement says, your body doesn't have what it needs to actually digest it, so the nutritional impact is weak. And I'm going to talk a little bit about fire and water here in a minute, but to that same point, there's one thing about growing an animal or growing plants in the proper way and eating the right things, but many times what we don't recognize is that when we prepare foods, when we cook foods, we use fire most of the time, right? We're usually using high amounts of heat, and as we provide heat to animal or plant-based products, we reduce the nutritional impact that product has, okay? We reduce its digestibility, and we make it difficult for our bodies to actually consume it. It's kind of a strange thing that we do ourselves. So fire, gives us warmth. It lights the room. It provides us the ability to see, right? It provides us the ability to create lethality as we cook foods. But I think that what we're going to find as we move into the next 20 years is that there's ways to apply heat to get lethality in our food, but we can do it with the ability to nourish our bodies a little bit better. So what do I mean? I mean that if we used water to conduct energy, right, then we could actually come to a really defined and precise temperature, right? And by defining and having precise temperature, like we do when we sous vide, which we do at Defiant and at AuraPea, we actually can keep the nutritional impact in the product. And by keeping the nutritional impact in the product, I can give you an example that with chicken and beef today, and also with our Aratine for our plant-based chickpea, we get about a 3 to 4 times more nutritional impact in consumption. So it's pretty huge. So you could take 4 ounces of beef and end up having to consume 12 ounces in a traditional cook method to get what 4 ounces of beef can give us. So what does that do? It makes our entire system more sustainable, right? And why is that? Because we can cook using water, and we can manage temperature so precisely when we cook with water that we end up not having to break the cell structure of the animal-based or the plant-based product, right? And so by not unraveling the cell structure of the protein, we end up being able to digest it, okay? And we don't lose it. So many products, especially in the plant-based and animal-based space, are adulterated because as we consume them, either from a texture standpoint or from a flavor standpoint, in traditional cook methods, we've cooked the moisture out of the product, and now we're having to reintroduce moisture so that it's actually has the texture and the feel that we expect it to have. So my point is that I think sustainability is on both sides. It's not only how we grow an animal, it's also how we process the animal and how we consume the animal or the plant-based protein that's really important. And so I want to tell a little story about how I came on my journey to really coming up with using that method of cooking sous vide. I was on the streets of Paris with a famous chef named Jean-Marc Tachet and another chef named Bruno Gassol and Bernard Lebu. And we had just walked out of Joel Robuchon's restaurant on the Champs-Élysées. And we were walking down the street and we were discussing a kind of a hypothesis, but actually a study that was being done in France at that point in time around the idea of using sous vide cooking to help cancer patients recover quickly. And they were starting to see incredible results because the nutritional impact of what was happening. I became very curious, it was 2009, about why. And so I started to study that, and that put me on a path and a journey. And it not only put me on a path and a journey to find more nutritional food, but it also put me on a path and a journey to love myself, but the things I put into my body and the people that were around me. And so we created a culture of people inside my businesses and also in the people that we encircle ourselves with that are driving that change. And it's pretty interesting how that came about and how meaningful that is. How many of you have been to Paris? Great. I can't wait to go again. But the idea that we then moved on to build the largest sous vide plant in North America, and we started to really design studies around that nutritional impact and what's going to change in that nutritional impact. I got the question yesterday about why has some of the large processors not moved to that type of technology. And the fact of the matter is that the large meat and plant-based processors have already put capital into their operations. And they haven't opened up to the idea that nutritional impact is not just how we raise something, but it's how we process something. And they're going to wake up to that in the years to come. How much time do I have? Good? We're done? Let me step down here. Do you guys have any questions for me? Anyone?
Yeah. But once you get going and this becomes the absolute way to eat meat, it's going to be far removed from the efficiency and the evil capitalism of current meat standards. So how do you scale and get this in the mouths of people who don't have a lot of money?
Yeah, so Defiant was created for absolutely that purpose. So a couple things. Our operation in Cambridge, Indiana, we can process, depending on the configuration of what we process, about 60 million pounds of meat, okay? That system, it's a 10-tank system. We have space in that room to put another 20 tanks, so we can produce 180 million pounds out of that facility on an annual basis. We're also in the process of putting a similar 10-tank system on the East Coast. We're going to do some things different on the East and West Coast as we build those plants out. And the reason is that we want to do some things that are a little bit more flexible. So a lot of what we do in the big system, it's a fully automated system in and out. So it's very much the same type of processes that we use in large meat processing or plant-based processing with fire, but as far as volumes and capacities, et cetera. So it's not more expensive to cook that way. Okay, and it's actually all in a closed loop water system, so we're actually keeping the energy, so it's green. But at the end of the day, what we're doing on the East and West Coast are really trying to make it more flexible so that smaller chains can actually purchase from us, so that we don't have to go to just the Paneras of the world. And so that transition's occurring. Does that answer your question? So what I do believe is that, and I'll also say that Armorinox, who builds our tank systems, in the last 3 years has had significant growth globally in sous vide systems of scale. So it's coming. And it's all around health. And the products are delicious. Any other questions? Gotta be somebody that has a question. Let me finish by saying to all of the women that are in the room, thank you for being great mothers and nourishing us. Go into the world with the greatest amount of impact that you can bring. It's the combination of men and women accepting each other, understanding each other, that's really going to create a paradigm shift in the way we think, okay? It's time, it's your time. So speak up, be impactful, make change. Thanks.